Hey, I'm Follygon, and today I'm turning this 2D drawing of Blackbeard from one piece into a 3D sculpt. From rough sketch to final render, you'll see the entire process start to finish. Let's do it. I always start from a sphere, classic Follygon move. This perfect little orb is about to turn into a chaotic, grinning pirate warlord. But this is the best part. It's the moment where anything is possible. I'm not committing to anything yet, just kind of feeling things out. Stretching the form, pulling shapes. Think of it like doodling in 3D. Loose, fast, super rough. If you look at this stage and think, what am I even looking at? You're doing it right. I don't worry about details here, just volume and gesture. Big, sweeping moves. You can't make a good sculpture if things are already broken at the blob stage, so even though it looks messy, this part matters. At this stage, Blackbeard kinda looks like a weird potato. That's normal, trust the process. Now I start building those basic forms: head, chest, arms, that big old pirate gut. It's kinda like playing with Play-Doh, no details, no finesse, just kinda shoving chunks together to get things right. I'm checking the silhouette constantly. Does it feel like Blackbeard yet? Is he wide enough? Is the head too small, too tall? So I'm not just copying a reference here, I'm trying to capture the vibe. That heavy, looming, unpredictable presence. This stage is all about relationships, how the forms connect, how the weight is distributed. If something feels off here, it's gonna haunt me for the rest of the sculpt. So I spent extra time making sure that the base feels solid. And now he's developing from potato into kinda looking like a knockoff action figure. But once again, I'm gonna have to ask you to trust the process. Now that the sculpt is, quote, locked in, it's time to dress this guy up. Color, clothing, and accessories do a ton of heavy lifting when it comes to selling the character. Blackbeard's look is loud. He's got this massive open coat, accessories everywhere, and a big pirate hat that's just way too dramatic to be practical. But that's kind of the point. He's not subtle. He's a walking red flag, and his outfit should scream that. I try to keep the clothing shapes bold and readable. Think costume silhouette more than realistic tailoring. I also take this moment to rough in the beard and hair. It's still early, so I'm not locking in every curl or strand, just trying to feel out the volume, flow, and overall shape. His hair's wild and the beard's even wilder. They both need to look like they're barely being held together. Then, this weirdly satisfying moment where I pop in the teeth and tongue. The inside of the mouth is like a hidden set piece. Most people won't stare into it, but when you don't do it right, something always feels off. Plus, Blackbeard's got that crooked grin, and it needs to feel gross and loud. Big teeth, gummy smile, it all adds to his personality. For color, I'm keeping it close to the artwork I'm referencing, while using his anime palette to help nail the look and feel. All of this, color, clothing, accessories, it's where the character clicks. Suddenly, this pile of digital clay starts to feel like a real dude. A dangerous, probably smelly dude. Now it's time to really dial things in, refining the face, pushing the details, and layering in more paint to bring this beast to life. The face is where the magic happens. This is where I spend most of my time. I refine the forms, cheekbones, nose, lips, and really lean into that signature expression. He's got this unhinged, cocky smile that's almost charming if you ignore the whole murderous pirate thing. I'll build in asymmetry later, but for now we can save time by keeping things the same. Once the forms feel right, I start layering in the finer details. Organic feeling skin from wrinkles and lines around the mouth and eyes. Not too much, just enough to give it grit. And the paint gets a second pass here too. I add variation, reds in the nose and cheeks, darkening under the eyes, a bit of discoloration in the skin, nothing flat. Everything's alive. Between the sculpt and the paint, the face is finally starting to click. Now when I look at him, I don't see the sculpt anymore, I see the actual character. Alright, now it's time to give this guy his massive collar. It's like a pirate and a peacock had a baby. I've already blocked in with big, bold shapes first, and now I refine it into something much more clean and easier to work with. And this thing does a ton of work. It frames his face, adds height, adds drama, and because everything else on him is so loud, the hat, the hair, the grin, the collar has to compete. So I push the angles, flaring it out more than you'd expect, and exaggerate the volume. Later, I push it even more. When I first looked at Blackbeard's cloak, I thought, oh cool, it's made of smoke or some kind of dark magical cloud. Turns out it's actually a feathered boa, a giant, extremely dramatic, bird-like explosion of feathers wrapped around his shoulders. Surprisingly, pirates and peacocks, maybe not all that different. But honestly, I liked the cloud interpretation more, so I decided to stick with what I had, sculpting it like a rolling storm with soft, puffed up forms that swirl around his back like smoke. I'm not going for realism here, I'm thinking about motion, rhythm, and silhouette. It should feel dramatic and just a little unnatural, like the air around Blackbeard is disturbed just by his presence. It's not exactly canon, but it feels right, and for me, that's the fun of stylizing, picking the version of reality that tells the best story. Alright, let's talk about the hat. This thing's been sitting up there since the blockout phase like a big floppy placeholder, and now it's finally time to give it some love. First, I clean up the shape, sharpen the silhouette, get the brim flowing with a nice curve, and make sure it actually fits his head. It's so easy to let hats float like UFOs in 3D if you're not careful. After shaping the overall form, I noticed the big cut at the top of the hat was a bit distracting because, hey, it wasn't there. So I carefully carved it in, reshaping the top to feel more natural. This guy's not buying new hats. He's wearing the same one he's had since his first mutiny. This is where the magic happens. Early on, everything's perfectly symmetrical because digital sculpting tools make it easy, and it keeps things tidy. But real life, it's messy. Faces are never perfectly balanced, and neither is Blackbeard. I break symmetry to give him some personality, a crooked eyebrow here, a smirk that's just a little lopsided there. These tiny imperfections bring life to the sculpt. Suddenly he's not just a 3D model, he's a character with attitude and story. Expression is everything. I push the grin to feel cocky, almost unhinged, like he's daring you to challenge him. Expression can be subtle, but those tweaks pull the whole character together. Symmetry is great for building, but asymmetry is where the soul comes out. So always remember, imperfection is actually your friend. Now that the sculpt is feeling more solid, I move on to projecting some of the original 2D colors onto the model, specifically for the hat first. I line up the reference image in the same camera angle and then just blast that paint onto the sculpt. It's like stealing the soul of the 2D art and fusing it right into the 3D version. Still like an artist, right? The cool thing is, this gives me all the little nuances I might miss if I tried to paint it by hand, like soft gradients, texture hints, even a bit of lighting. The bandana especially benefits. It picks up that slight faded, worn out orange shadow and blends beautifully into the rest of the sculpt. Of course, it's not perfect out of the box. I still go back in and clean things up, smooth edges, fix stretching, and punch up areas that got a little too muddy. This, of course, involves sculpting cleanup as well. But it's a great shortcut for capturing the spirit of the original 2D design. The eyebrows were looking off. Too flat, too generic, and for a character like Blackbeard, that just won't cut it. So I go back in and start reshaping them, giving them more structure, more angle, and more attitude. Eyebrows are underrated. They do so much for expression. A subtle shift in the arch can turn a neutral face into a smirk or a snarl. So I sharpen the outer ends, thicken the inner part, and give them this aggressive tilt that really sells his intensity. I also refine the forms, making sure that they sit naturally on the brow ridge and that they feel like they're growing out, not just stamped on. A few splitting hairs sculpted in for additional form, and suddenly, he's got presence. It's a small change, but it completely shifts the energy. Not really much of a smile anymore, more like he's plotting something. Time to tackle the teeth, and with Blackbeard, they're not the straight, sparkling kind. Sorry, Chip Skylark. These things are jagged, chunky, and more than a little unsettling. I start with basic forms, carving in the general spacing and shape for each tooth. Then I go in and make sure that they're not too perfect. Uneven widths, slightly crooked alignment, and a couple tilted just a bit off. It's the kind of smile that says, I win bar fights with my face. With the teeth in place, it's time to give them something to sit in. The gums. It's one of those details you don't always notice, but when it's missing, everything feels off. I start by sculpting a soft ridge that flows around the base of the teeth, wrapping each one just enough to make them feel rooted. Not too smooth though, this isn't a toothpaste commercial, it's Blackbeard. His gums should look like they've been through some things. I also pay attention to the way the teeth sit in the gums, pushing them up just enough so it feels grounded in the anatomy. I didn't want the teeth to be too stylized, but I also didn't want them clean. So I found that sweet spot, pirate dentist chic. And once the teeth are in, boom, that smile becomes dangerous. Now it's time for the main event, the beard. This thing isn't normal facial hair, that's for sure. It's half its character in my opinion. I start by sculpting the big, chunky forms. Think of it less like hair and more like sculpted tubes of clay, stylized pieces that feel heavy and directional. I'm not aiming for realistic strands, I'm going for shape and flow. The beard flares out in all directions, almost like it's got a life of its own. That's on purpose. It helps push the energy and chaos of the character. It's wild, untamed, just like the man wearing it. Once the structure is more in place, I carve in separation and rhythm, staggering the chunks so it doesn't feel like a flat block. I also exaggerate the flow around the jaw to make sure it reads clearly from the front and sides. I'll be returning to this later to polish it even further. If the beard is the anchor, the hair is the explosion of cannon fire. Blackbeard's hair is huge, messy, and basically defies gravity. And that's exactly how I want it. I already have the big, chunky shapes from earlier, so now I can begin adding long, flowing pieces similar to the beard. The idea here is rhythm and flow, not realism. I want the hair to feel alive. I loop the hair into these wild arcs, stacking and layering the clumps to create controlled chaos. From the side, the hair pushes the silhouette way out, which helps him feel even bigger and more unpredictable. Now not only is the character yelling at us, but so is the hair. Messy, bold, and full of attitude, just like the man himself. I jump back to the hat to add detail, a strip of blue fabric tied around the base. It's not in every shot of the character, but I love what it adds. A pop of color, a bit of pirate flair, just more chaos. I sculpt it like a headband or tied sash, nothing too clean. The knot sits off to the side, and I let the ends trail a bit. It's all about suggesting motion. Either way, it makes the whole hat feel more personal. And now for one of my favorite weird touches, this flower sticking out of the hat. It feels so random for a character like Blackbeard, which is exactly why I love it. I start by building out some chunky petals. The shape is stylized, nothing too delicate or realistic. Maybe it's like a calling card, or maybe it's a joke. Maybe it's from someone he plundered. Who knows? I'm sure some fan out there does. Comment it below, let me know. Next up, the feathers. These sit tucked into the side of Blackbeard's hat, and they add just the right amount of swagger. Because of course he wouldn't stop at putting a flower in his hat, a giant collar, gold bling everywhere, we need feathers too. I go back and adjust the shape of my blockout from before. I don't go hyper detailed, just enough to suggest that soft, wispy form without overloading them with detail. Similar to the hat, I project the paint from the reference image to start, then go back in and clean them up. And then I cut in a couple shapes to the tips of the feather to add character, just enough to say, these used to be fancy, but now they're pirate fancy. At this point, the sculpt is working, but it's still a little safe. So I go back and start pushing everything to the absolute extreme, just like the 2D reference. The smile gets more crooked, the hair gets more wild, it's all pushed as far as I can. Every time I check the original 2D artwork, I realize it's more exaggerated than I remember. So I lean into it. The key here isn't always accuracy, it's energy. The 2D version is bursting with personality, so I want the 3D sculpt to feel the same way. That means going bolder with the expression, bigger with forms, and louder with the silhouette. This is something I see artists hesitate with a lot, like they're afraid to go too far. But honestly, too far is usually just right, especially when your character is a larger-than-life chaos pirate. After pushing those shapes, it's time to clean things up a bit. Make sure it feels intentional, not just messy for messiness sake. I go through and sharpen the edges of the hair clumps, redefining the major flows and curves without losing the wild, untamed vibe. Now let's get into the trim of the jacket, the details that really make his coat pop. All of these little things help to add depth of form and character. And now that we have more in place, it's time to think about how this bust ends. You want the bottom edge to feel intentional, a natural, interesting termination point, not just an abrupt cutoff. And here's where things got fun. I had this brilliant idea to take the fluffy orange cloak from earlier and flip it up and around the bottom of the character. Instead of letting it just hang or trail off, I really leaned into that cloud-like vibe, wrapping the cloak around like he's emerging from a big cloud of smoke. Now it's integrated with the actual character, and I love it. Now it's time for details, starting with the teeth. I begin to add more gross texture that make them more believable. I carve tiny forms, uneven surfaces to give them character. No pirate's teeth are perfect after all. And then a little grime and subtle color variation helps sell that nasty, battle-worn smile. The collar is a big statement piece, obviously, so I add bevels and wear and tear to make it feel heavy and real. Slight fabric imperfections add texture and break up flat areas, making the collar and all of the other fabric feel thick and weathered. Now, as I said earlier, the face is where the character really comes alive, so I add some more facets to help texture the face in a similar way to our 2D counterpart, adding more information without getting too soft. These little details add grit, enhancing the expression and personality of the character. The rest of the fabric gets some love too, subtle texturing folds where needed. I do this to make it all feel worn and lived in, not fresh off the rack. Small imperfections like this make the outfit feel authentic and tactile. The flower might be small, but it adds big personality. I rough up the petals with creases and asymmetry to give it a worn, weathered look. The hair takes quite a bit more time, as there are still larger problems I wanted to fix with the beard and hair. Places where shapes felt too boring, too similar, too accidental instead of designed. So I go to work on big shapes first. Then I carve in large lines and separate the big clumps to avoid it looking like a solid mass. A few smaller strands and subtle bends add realism while keeping that wild, untamed energy. I'm taking time to make everything feel intentional because, well, it is. For the final polish, I zoom back in and give extra attention to the two most expressive parts of the sculpt, the mouth and the eyes. I tweak the lips, teeth, gums, just about everything. Then I fine-tune the eyelids and brows to give them that perfect tension. Finally, I tweak the shapes of the actual iris to really help sell that crazy look. And with these last tweaks, everything clicks into place. Alright, everything's prepped and ready for rendering. I wrapped up the sculpt at around 25 million polygons, that's quite a lot, but after a little optimization magic, we're cruising at a smooth 3 million for the final render setup. Nice. Threw it all into Blender, dialed in the materials and lighting. Here's how he looked straight out of the render engine before any post-processing. And you know what time it is. The grand reveal, the moment of truth, the final renders. Welcome, my skipping friends. I know you're here for that pirate eye candy, and I respect it. But if you do want to see how this character came together from a humble sphere, the full process is waiting for you. Go check it out. It's a wild ride from start to finish. And to those of you who stuck around and watched the whole thing, seriously, thank you. Every like, every comment, every minute you spend here helps me continue to make the art that I love. Now, I've taught people who work at Disney, Blizzard, and other massive companies, as well as students on their very first day of sculpting. So whether you're a total beginner or aiming for studio level work, check out the Appeal Academy. I packed it with everything I know about digital sculpting. Link down below. And hey, if you love this one, you have to check out this video where I sculpted a knight original character. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.